today's world of high-speed connection, text messaging, and social networking, we often find ourselves searching for information. There are millions of blogs on the internet. News, sports, politics, and tech. But I bring it all together for you and present it in a relentlessly unconventional fashion. My name is Zenny Abraham, and this is the Blog Report. It's time now for news. Gentlemen, this gentleman is Elihu Mason Harris, the man for about 5 years. Actually, I still call him boss because I was his economic advisor, and he's also still a good friend. And Elihu, first of all, thank you. And I want to talk because I don't feel that people in Oakland know who you are as a former mayor of Oakland, but I want to get your view on, kind of work backwards. First of all, the current situation Occupy Oakland, because people watching that's the first thing on their mind. How do you think it's being handled? And when you were mayor of Oakland, you were mayor of Oakland from when to when? You were from 1991
to 1999.
Yeah, you had three re-election terms?
No, I just had 2 terms. 8 years is enough. 12, I'd probably be dead now. So, yeah, 8 years was enough. 8 years before Jerry Brown.
And how do you think the current mayor is handling the Occupy Oakland situation?
I think the situation's out of control, and that's unfortunate. It wasn't the mayor's making, but I think certainly it's the mayor's problem. As the strong mayor under our new form of government, I think the mayor has got to take the responsibility and take the steps necessary to bring this crisis to an end. When you've got legitimate protesters along with anarchists destroying the downtown, small businesses are being victimized, the image of the Oakland is being done continued harm. It's already had a bad image. And there's no solution at hand, then I think people are really questioning leadership. And I think it's the time you got to make some decisions and come up with a solution that's going to be hopefully in the interest of the city, as well as something that's going to be fair and equitable and that honors due process and First Amendment rights.
I know hindsight's 20/20, but if you were mayor, how would you have handled it?
I think first of all, I wouldn't let people occupy the space in front of City Hall. I think that was the wrong thing to do. It is the city's park. It is not the Occupy Oakland Park. There probably are places in Oakland where you could occupy, have a tent city that would not be precarious or challenging for other public citizens who wanted to come to City Hall and take care of their business. I think the issues that are raised by Occupy Oakland are in many ways not only correct, but appropriate, if not urgent. And I think now the whole issue has been skirted by the violence on both sides of the issue, and certainly the now confrontational matters that have arisen that makes it a much more difficult issue to bring under control and resolve.
You think Quan can survive this?
I think it's questionable. I think there are people who are believe that she's abdicated leadership and as a result should resign. There's certainly people still talking about recall. And before either of those things happen, I think she still has time to make some decisions and certainly to take some actions that are going to give people some comfort and a sense that there is leadership and certainly there's a willingness to stand up and do what's necessary to bring this under control.
You went through a lot as mayor, I think, an earthquake.
I didn't have the earthquake, I had the fire.
The fire, right.
The earthquake preceded me when I was in the state legislature.
That's right, you were in the 89 earthquake, right?
Right, I was in the state legislature in 89.
And you had the Oakland Hills fire, right?
Right, but the fire was on my watch. And in a very challenging time, but you had to make decisions. And as you know, then we had a city manager form of government. And people still looked at the mayor as the person who's going to stand up and be accountable for the actions of the city. And I think we did a pretty good job, certainly, of dealing with the issue at hand, i.e. the fire, but more importantly, helping people get back into their homes and restoring their neighborhoods after the fire.
Take us back, because we just went through the 20th anniversary of that. What are you most proud of in terms of the way the city responded to the Oakland Hills fire?
I think 2 things. One, certainly setting up the one-stop center that gave people a one place to go to get help, to get information, and to get all the steps necessary to get back on the road to recovery. The second thing is, I think the advocacy, not only of the mayor and the city, but also of the legislature. Barbara Lee, at the time, our assemblywoman, John Garamendi, the insurance commissioner, as well as our federal representatives, to really work on trying to bring the insurance industry into compliance with good faith relative to the homeowners whose homes have been destroyed, who in many cases did not have adequate insurance and were not able to rebuild without that advocacy, as well as the strength of the neighborhoods coming together as a community to make sure that there was an appropriate response to the fire. One is to look at zoning, to look at adding firehouses, to look at environmental measures that would reduce the amount of brush and trees and other fuel for those fires, to minimize future fires. Now, in some cases, those actions have not been followed up over the last 20 years. But the fact that we initiated them and we were appropriate and constructive in response, I think is a source of pride for everybody in Oakland, particularly those most affected who lived in the hills.
What was it that, because I remember particularly people in Rockridge, some people were talking about creating a whole new Piedmont type city like Tuscany or something like that, and then it died out. Was that because of the city's response, or?
No. I think it was just the idea of the crime problems in Oakland and the image of Oakland generally, and they thought it would help their value of their homes. Like people who live in Montclair, if you go to the post office in Montclair, it says Montclair, California.
Yeah.
even though it's part of Oakland. And as you know, Piedmont was part of Oakland until the 20s, and by a very slim margin was able to create an independent city from what had been a neighborhood in the past. So yeah, I think that there certainly were those who perhaps might have wanted out of anger and frustration, but the actual Rockridge issue was much more about the idea of being able to have higher values in homes. It's like people in the area around Telegraph and 51st think of themselves as living in the Temescal neighborhood, but they started calling it Lower Rockridge, so their property values would be higher.
I didn't realize that. That's interesting. Also, it comes to my mind, the Raiders came back while you were mayor. Looking back, is there anything you would like to have done differently?
Well, I think certainly I would like to have had more responsibility in the negotiations. Again, in the mid-'90s, we were still under the city manager form of government, and the city manager...
Whereas now we have strong mayor.
Right, right. And the city manager's office actually did the negotiation. I was a figurehead, and I take responsibility on the political side of the equation, but the actual negotiation of the deal was done by the city manager's office and the county. And they made some mistakes, I believe, in the PSL program, certainly some other issues with Al Davis. It wasn't a political... Al Davis is a very strong individual.
What do you remember about him, by the way, because you met Al Davis?
I remember Al Davis and Joe Alioto coming into my office shortly after the Raiders indicated they were going to return from Los Angeles. And I won't say I was intimidated, but it was intimidating.
That's a pair.
Yeah, as a pair. And they were like, they weren't good cop and bad cop. They were bad cop and badder cop. And, but they were both very gentlemanly and very nice and appropriate. But it's just that you're dealing with two people who have no problem exercising power. And when I was in the room with them alone, and I had no backup, I wanted to make sure there was an emergency button so that someone would be able to come in to save me if they decided to tear me up.
Would you say, back then the city manager was Henry Gardner?
Yes.
And as a reporter...
Actually, it wasn't Henry Gardner at that point.
Okay.
It was actually Craig Koshin.
Craig Koshin, right. It was Craig Koshin, I stand corrected.
Yeah, right. Who had been Henry's assistant. Mm-hmm. But yes, it was Craig Koshin. It was the city manager, Ezra Rapport, who was the deputy who was in charge of the Raider negotiations.
Do you think Ezra's been unfairly treated? In other words, or was he appropriately... Because people say, well, he made a mistake, they throw him under the bus, but he did create the deal that brought the Raiders back.
He didn't create the deal.
Okay.
I mean, quite frankly, George Vukas and others at the Coliseum, including Wayne Valley and other former Raider owners who were still wanted to have him in Oakland, started negotiating their return. And let's be clear, they were not economically successful in Los Angeles. We didn't woo them back as much as they wanted to come back. But they had some conditions. They weren't coming back without some reward and some improvements in the facility, which was the reason they left in the first place. So that's understandable. But in the final analysis, I think we gave up too much. And the PSLs were certainly one example of that. But that was the deal that was cut by, again, the city administrator's city manager's office, as well as the county administrator's office, and again voted upon by the city council and the board of supervisors. So we all got to take responsibility for it. I'm not trying
Right.
I'm not trying to duck that, but I do want people to understand that the process is a little bit different, and it was not an executive decision; it was an administrative decision that led to the negotiation and the agreement.
Something else too, because I was in the room when this happened. You created, for all practical purposes, the Uptown Entertainment District.
Mm-hmm.
Tell my viewers how that came about, because it goes back to David, the developer, David. But tell my viewers about how the Uptown came from nothing to. I think we were in a meeting, February. I remember February 12th, 1996, and David Martin was the guy.
Right.
Yeah. How did that all come about to become Uptown? You know?
Well, basically, we needed to recreate a downtown. And the issue is where it's going to be. When the redevelopment agency was set up back in the 60s, they tried to move downtown from the 20th and Broadway area towards City Center, and actually had land set aside for retail as well as for housing. At some point, that was abandoned in favor of a commercial district with tall buildings and office workers, which unfortunately was not connected to the retail, which was 6-7 blocks away. When the
Folks, we'll be right back with more from the blogosphere.
city under Lionel Wilson was looking at creating a new downtown. They entered into a partnership with the Roush Company in Maryland. And before that deal could be consummated, the president of Roush was killed in the late 80s in a plane accident.
Mike Spear, right? I think
Mike Spear.
Yeah.
In the late 80s, back east. So we went to the Roush Company.
In a helicopter crash.
A helicopter crash.
Right. Yeah.
So we went to the Roush Company and went to others and tried to resurrect the deal. Before we could do that, Federated Department Store decided to close the Emporium Capwells. And we went back to Cincinnati to meet with them about what we could do to restore a presence of not only a Capwells, but also a Macy's and other retail leaders, Nordstrom's and others. And we began to approach developers and others about that. We wanted to make the downtown stretch closer to that 20th and Broadway, 20th and Telegraph corridor and connect that area with downtown. So that was basically what started the whole idea of Uptown, was that we wanted to create an atmosphere using the Paramount and the Fox as entertainment bases, but to create restaurants and nightclubs and housing and major department stores that would give people a 24-hour or at least a 16-hour downtown from early in the morning through the workday into the evening. And that was the effort that was Uptown. It's certainly evolved into something a little bit different, but that was the original intent, was to create a downtown at Uptown.
If you were still there, or even how would you like to see Uptown evolve? You said it's evolved into something a little different. That kind of begs the question.
Well, I think that they have made the best land use decisions. I think they spent a lot more than they needed to on the Fox. We bought the Fox for about $3.5 million with the idea that we would use it as a base for development, but nobody envisioned it was going to be $80 million and not have all the other infrastructure around it. I'm not sure that was the best use of limited redevelopment dollars and without a big private sector match. I mean, almost no private money was involved in the development of Uptown as it stands, and still very much incomplete. Yeah. So I think it's not a good planning process, and certainly not a good development process, and not a good use of redevelopment.
It's almost
dollars.
piecemeal, rather.
Very piecemeal. Yeah. We had planned to bring in movie theaters and bring in, again, retail as well as housing, but it would be high-rise housing. This, the housing that's there now is basically low-rise housing, and certainly knowing what happened in 2007-8 with the housing industry certainly is a factor. But certainly the original concept was that there would be much higher density of residencies as well as much more vibrant activities that would make people want to be in that kind of an urban environment, and particularly younger people who'd want to come and live downtown and be part of an urban nirvana, if you would.
Another organization you were heavily involved with, the Oakland A's. Now they have Moneyball and the movie, but going back, what do you remember most about working with the A's?
Well, how wonderful it was when the Haas family owned them. They were investors, not only in the A's, but in the community. And they were willing to spend the money necessary to create a championship team, certainly a contending team. And we thought that we were going to be able to build upon that. And when we ended up having to find new buyers when Walter Haas passed, it was very challenging because at that point we had to take who we could get, somebody who would at least keep the team in town. The good news is we've been able to keep the team in town. The bad news is we've not been able to have a contending team, a community-connected team where the fans and the community were one. Now you have a much smaller fan base, certainly a much smaller season ticket base. And as a result, there is a fractious relationship between the city and the team, with the new ownership seeking to move the team to San Jose, and no real commitment that I think has led to a real breakdown in faith and certainly in support for the team in the local community.
Is it that we've had administrations that haven't known how to negotiate? Because I remember when I worked with you, they would try to talk past me to you, and you would point back to me, but you had a rule: never spend too much money, never let them get the upper hand, and always make sure you understand what you have to bring to the table. Do you think that's still the case with?
I think Oakland's been operating for a long time, including the period that I served as mayor, from a defensive perspective.
Oh, and by the way, thanks for watching my back doors.
You're welcome. But Oakland has been operating in a defensive posture for certainly a good 30 years. The fact that it was a manufacturing based city, and you had the automobile factories, you had the food manufacturers, all of these companies leave town. Safeway,
that's right.
Certainly has had an impact on not only the image of the city, but the economic viability of the city. The fact you had white flight in the 60s, where you had the middle class who lived along freeway corridors begin to move to Hayward and Fremont and beyond. I also had a destabilizing fact on the stability of Oakland and its neighborhoods. All those things have taken a toll on the city. We have higher unemployment. We certainly have more poverty. We certainly have more of a division between the hills and the flatlands.
Right.
And those are hard things to overcome. Oakland has done a much better job than many other urban centers, Detroit, St. Louis, but it's still a very difficult environment when you have a city that is been perceived as a minority city, which is no longer the case. As you know, Oakland is now pretty well balanced, racially and ethnically. But which I think is a real strength. And we need to continue.
I predicted that in Montclair in '94. I said we're going to be there.
Well, we've gotten there, and we're not using that as a strength. I think we should be using our significant Asian population to bring in more investments from China and Japan, Korea, Singapore, and Malaysia. I certainly think we ought to be doing more to try to bring in some of the money from Africa, and certainly investments from the oil countries, yeah, them too. So I think there's a lot of things where we have not done a good job as a community of selling the positive aspects of Oakland. And as a result, the negative has become more predominant than ever before.
And speaking of negative, I remember you brought me in your office. This was like about 7:30 in the morning on a Monday, and you tossed a document at me about Ebonics. Remember that? Talk to my viewers about your view of Ebonics then, because a lot of people don't know about that history in Oakland. Yeah.
Well, as you know, the school board embraced a philosophy, which was that Ebonics was okay. And I think it was an unfortunate issue because it was portrayed as if somehow or other they were banning English as the official language of the Oakland public schools. I think what they were trying to do, and it never could get a handle on their original efforts, was to try to say just because someone didn't speak in correct English didn't mean that they were intellectually incapable and should be treated as retarded or special ed. And I think that was absolutely true. It'd be like having a young Hispanic or Latin American kid being treated inappropriately because Spanish was their primary language. And I think that's really still correct, or Asian child for that matter.
Right.
Language is important, and you have to build language skills. But I don't think anyone would use language to define IQ. And I think that's what the Ebonics movement was about. But it got treated as if it was somehow trying to justify poor English as saying that it was a second language and should be accepted as the official language of the black community. That was never the case. But you could never get a hold of that issue once it got out there and people got in a defensive posture. They tried to defend Ebonics rather than the concept that language should be not used as a defining way of determining intellect.
How do you see the Oakland education system now with all the budget cuts? Can it, scores have been improving, but can it survive the revenue problems?
I don't think so. I think what you got now is a fractious system, even more fractious than it was before. Back in the 80s and 90s, the issue was much more about private education versus public education. Now you have the third wheel, if you would, which is charter schools. And without making a judgment about which is better, I think most people say, well, private education is good. Well, you get what you pay for. But given the public funding, which is atrocious, you now have a situation where those who can, who are intellectually, financially, or in any other way capable, are taking their kids out of the public schools. And you all figure out it's a child abuse to leave your kids in the public school. And that includes the superintendent of schools. And as a result, you now have schools that have gone from nearly 60,000 enrollment to 36,000 enrollment. And you got all these buildings, all these facilities that are no longer being used by the public schools. That to me is a situation that has got to be addressed. And certainly at this point, the only way they've been addressed is by closing schools. And that puts even more people in the position of wanting to have their children either in charter schools or private schools because the public education system is no longer serving them in a way they see as appropriate.
How do you think the current superintendent of schools is doing, Tony Smith?
I think he's well-intentioned. I think he's caught up in a very difficult situation, and I don't think he's built the appropriate community base for his decisions and his leadership. He's got some good ideas, I believe, and I think certainly good intentions. But I believe that he's in a very, very difficult position because he does not have a political base or a community base or a parents base that is behind those decisions. And I think that's going to put he and the school board at odds with the community.
Looking back, what's the thing that you did as mayor that you're most proud
of? Connecting the community with City Hall. We put programs in place that I believe saw the community and the neighborhoods as the soul of the city. Whether it was community policing or the Team Oakland concept, the Clean Up Oakland of graffiti. We really tried to work with the neighborhood associations on crime and public safety and parks and make the city not only the agent for public service, but also the partner for public service with the neighborhoods and the community. We worked on infant child programs, trying to make sure that young people were prepared with early childhood education, teen pregnancy. I mean, you name the issue. I believe we had a program to address it. Cultural arts. I mean, I think all the cultural organizations lost the ballet. We're not getting support from the museum. It is no longer a public museum. Those are things that I think are indicative of either poor planning or certainly not continuing the partnerships that I think are important in defining a a positive relationship between the city and its citizens.
Something else you had to deal with was Oakland's homicide rate, but I don't remember Oakland's police department as having quite as bad a relationship with the community as it has today, or am I wrong?
Well, let me say this. When I became mayor, there were 175 homicides in the city. By the time I left, it was in the 60s. And that came about not because I said stop the homicide. It came about because we did community policing. And the community policing set up a partnership where there was less distrust of the police. We also set up a situation where the police weren't just responding to crime, but they were preventing crime. And if you got just police who come after the fact, after somebody's already been shot or robbed or whatever, then you're going to continue to have horrible crime statistics. When the community and the police partner together, then you got a chance where there is trust, where there is a real sense of public service on the part of the police, and I think crime did go down. We worked with the drug dealers and trying to get them to understand that they were going to go to jail, they were going to have their lives destroyed, and that there were alternatives to becoming drug dealers and other destructive people in the city. But anyway, make a long story short, yes, I believe that community policing was a very positive thing. I'm really sad about the fact that the next mayor abandoned community policing, and the police went back to riding around in their cars and responding to police calls. I think that was the wrong way. I liked them on bicycles, I liked them on foot patrol in neighborhoods, I liked the fact that they were working on horseback and riding around and connecting with children in the schools, in the communities, in the neighborhoods.
What do you think of the way the current mayor handled the police chief situation?
Well, I think what's worse is the whole sense of a breakdown between the police and the community, and the mayor needs to solve that. The mayor's going to have to step in, establish, again, a sense of trust between the police and the community, and part of that's going to be dialogue, and part of that's going to be leadership, and I think that's a tremendous challenge for the mayor, but one that the mayor's got to address.
You ready to run for mayor again?
No, I'm running from office, not
before we close, too, you mentioned George Lucas in the Coliseum, and I get the sense sometimes that there are persons like yourself who are still around, Lucas, but I told this to someone at Gene's Quan staff. I said that I feel like they don't call on the people who know, who've been there before. Is that the case? Has Gene called you and said, "I need your advice"?
No, Gene has never called me, and that's okay. That's her right. Once I got out of office, whether it was Jerry Brown or Ron Dellums or Gene Quan.
But Jerry called you.
No, Jerry didn't.
He
call
didn't?
Me.
Okay.
No, I talked to Jerry.
Yeah.
He didn't call me.
Oh, okay.
But my point is that I understood that my term had passed, and that I wasn't going to try to be somewhere lurking over their shoulder or second guessing their decisions. And I still believe that's true. I'm not going to second guess Gene Quan. I think she needs to do something about the problem that now exists. And I might have handled it differently. But my point is that she's the mayor now. And as long as she's the mayor, I would not only support her, but support certainly her willingness to make the hard decisions that need to be made. And when she makes those decisions, even if she's wrong, I think it's much easier to support those decisions than if she's making decisions that lead to greater problems and greater chaos, if not crisis.
Well, since we mentioned Jerry, how would you assess his time as mayor?
Jerry is a very able politician, and he was able to get strong mayor through, which I was not. He certainly, I think, was able to build his political career on the position of a mayor of the city of Oakland, and I give credit for that. I am not happy that some of the good programs that my administration left were not adopted, embraced, and continued by the next mayor.
Like Quan, for example.
Like community policing.
Yeah.
But by the same token, again, I realized it was his administration and his right to do some things differently, and he did them differently. And I think it's up to the citizens to determine, whether or not they like the changes that he made, or whether or not they would have liked to see some of the programs that were initiated in the 90s and under my administration continued.
What about Ron Dellums and that?
I think Ron was very well intentioned. I think that being mayor is a lot different than being a congressman, and I think that one of the realities he faced was that he'd been doing wholesale politics in Washington, as I had done in Sacramento, and being mayor is retail government. It is customer service, and you got to be there 24/7. You got to be in the community, and it's not a retirement job. And I think that Ron felt that he was going to come back and bring leadership to the city of Oakland, which I think was more than willing and able to do. But I think it unfortunately is a much more hands-on process than I think he was ever prepared or intended to do.
Elihu, that's 30 minutes. We could talk for 3 hours, but I know you got other things on your plate. I appreciate the time. I'll come back to you too.
Okay, then. Thanks.
Thank you.